So the real question on everyone's mind is mandatory vaccination possible? To answer this question, let's look at the government's own legislation. In 1946, the U.S. Public Health Service was established and Executive Order 9708 was signed, listing the communicable diseases where quarantines can be used. In 1946 and 2003, cholera, diphtheria, tuberculosis, typhoid, smallpox, yellow fever, and viral hemorrhagic fevers were added to the list. On April 4, 2003, Executive Order 13295 added SARS to the forced vaccination list. Then, on April 1, 2005, Executive Order 13295 added influenza caused by novel or re-emergent influenza viruses that are causing or have the potential to cause a pandemic. The President gave the Secretary of Health and Human Services the power to quarantine at his or her discretion. The Secretary of Health and Human Services now has the power to arrange for the apprehension and examination of persons reasonably thought to be infected. A cough or a fever could put a person at risk for being quarantined for an extended period of time without recourse. On January 28, 2003, Project BioShield was introduced during Bush's State of the Union address. This created permanent and indefinite funding authority to develop medical countermeasures. The National Institutes of Health was given the authority to speed approval of drugs and vaccines. Emergency approval of fast-tracked drugs and vaccines can now be given without the regular course of safety testing. On December 17, 2006, Division E, the Public Readiness and Emergency Preparedness Act, was created. This was added as an addendum to the Defense Appropriations Bill H.R. 2863 at 11:20 p.m. on a Saturday night, long after House committee members had signed off on the bill and gone home for the holidays. Under Section B, Paragraph 1, it states, "The Secretary of Health and Human Services can make a determination that a disease, health condition, or threat constitutes a public health emergency. He or she may then recommend the manufacture, testing, development, administration, or use of one or more covered countermeasures." A covered countermeasure is defined as a pandemic product, vaccine, or drug. This act also provides complete liability protection for all drugs, vaccines, or biological products deemed a covered countermeasure and used for an outbreak of any kind. Complete liability protection has been given to drug companies for any product used for any public health emergency declared by the Secretary of Health and Human Services. Pharmaceutical corporations are now protected from all accountability unless criminal intent to do harm can be proven by the injured party. They are protected from liability even if they know the drug will be harmful to your health. You, however, have no protection or recourse at all from a government who stands to profit from forced mandatory vaccination.
We've asked for U.S. attorneys' opinions. Is it illegal to create a recreated, weaponized 1918 virus? Is what Taubenberger's team doing, is it illegal? They always respond, no, under the guidelines of the U.S. Department of Defense, it's not illegal at all. They have the rights and the abilities to do that. And it's not illegal to create a vaccine to fight against it. Just look at what happened in anthrax during the Gulf War. We supplied the anthrax to Iraq and Saddam Hussein, and so when we go in there, we have to get vaccines for all of our soldiers to protect against the weapon that we created for them. Okay, so it's not illegal to do all that. In fact, the military wants those vaccines to have in stockpile, so that's not illegal.
Now, shockingly, this isn't the only time that we can see in the U.S. Code where the government feels it has the right to poison, irradiate, and use humans as test subjects. Let's take a look at some of these in the U.S. Code. Let's look at Title 50, Chapter 32. Listed as the Chemical and Biological Warfare Program, we go to Section 1520A, where the government lists restrictions on use of human subjects for testing of chemical or biological agents. Part A reads Prohibited Activities. The Secretary of Defense may not conduct, directly or by contract, 1. Any test or experiment involving the use of a chemical agent or biological agent on a civilian population, or 2. Any other testing of a chemical agent or biological agent on human subjects. Well, that certainly sounds like a good thing until we read Part B. Under exceptions, it states, subject to subsections C, D, and E of this section, the prohibition in subsection A of this section does not apply to a test or experiment carried out for any of the following purposes. 1. Any peaceful purpose that is related to a medical, therapeutic, pharmaceutical, agricultural, industrial, or research activity. Remember, we're talking about humans like you and me here. 2. Any purpose that is directly related to protection against toxic chemicals or biological weapons and agents. And 3. Any law enforcement purpose, including any purpose related to riot control. Under Part C, it states, informed consent required, and this is very important. The Secretary of Defense may conduct a test or experiment described in subsection B of this section only if informed consent to the testing was obtained from each human subject in advance of the testing on that subject. Now, it is important to note here that your consent is always assumed in all of these experiments. The only way to protest this type of treatment, irradiation, and chemical exposure by your government is to verbally and in writing not consent. Again, consent is always assumed. And because you are fooled into voting for representatives, your consent is granted by Congress. Under Part D, prior notice to Congress, not later than 30 days after the date of final approval within the Department of Defense of plans for any experiment to study or be conducted by the Department of Defense, whether directly or under contract, involving the use of human subjects for the testing of a chemical agent or biological agent, the Secretary of Defense shall submit to the Committee on Armed Services of the Senate and the Committee on Armed Services of the House of Representatives a report stating forth a full accounting of those plans, and the experiment or study may then be conducted only after the end of the 30-day period, beginning on the date such report is received by those committees. Again, your consent to be tested on is being granted by your congressmen and your senators, and generally with the full knowledge and comprehension of the governor of your state. In Part E, the U.S. Code actually defines what a biological agent is. In this section, the term biological agent means any microorganism, including bacteria, viruses like the flu virus, fungi, rickettsia, or protozoa, pathogen or infectious substance, and any naturally occurring bioengineered or synthesized component of any such microorganism, pathogen or infectious substance, whatever its origin or method of production, like the re-engineered, recombined flu virus, that is capable of causing death, disease, or other biological malfunction in a human, an animal, a plant, or another living organism. Deterioration of food, water, equipment, supplies, or materials of any kind, or deleterious alteration of the environment. So the government just gave its permission to kill, disease, or make to malfunction the human, animal, plant, or other living organism's body. They've given their permission to deteriorate our food, water, equipment, supplies, and materials of any kind, and they've given their permission to alter our environment. This is your government. And these are the same people who want to vaccinate you, and passing laws to force vaccinate you and your children. Under Section 1519, labeled Lethal Binary Chemical Munitions, and under Paragraph A, it states, notwithstanding any other provision of law, none of the funds authorized to be appropriated by this or any other act shall be used for the purpose of production of lethal binary chemical munitions, unless the President certifies to Congress that the production of such munitions is essential to the national interest, and submits a full report thereon to the President of the Senate, the Vice President, and the Speaker of the House of Representatives as far in advance of the production of such munitions as is practicable. And what is the definition of lethal binary chemical munitions? Simply, they are 1. Any toxic chemical, solid, liquid, or gas, which, through its chemical properties, is intended to be used to produce injury or death to human beings. Or 2. Any unique device, instrument, apparatus, or contrivance, including any components or accessories thereof, intended to be used to disperse or otherwise disseminate any such toxic chemical. Again, your government is allowing itself to harm you with any toxic chemical, solid, liquid, or gas, dispersed from any device, instrument, apparatus, etc. And these are the people that we are hoping are protecting us from vaccination, injury, infection, and death. Moving on to Section 1515, listed as suspension and presidential authorization, we read that after November 19, 1969, the operation of this chapter or any portion thereof may be suspended by the President during the period of any war declared by Congress and during the period of any national emergency declared by Congress or by the President. Note here that a national emergency was certainly declared for the so-called swine flu outbreak of 2009, and that state of emergency has not, to this date, been relieved. Under Section 1516, titled Delivery Systems, it states that none of the funds authorized to be appropriated by this Act shall be used for the procurement of delivery systems specifically designed to disseminate lethal chemical or any biological warfare agents, or for the procurement of delivery system parts or components specifically designed for such purpose, unless the President shall certify to the Congress that such procurement is essential to the safety and security of the United States. Under Section 1512, titled Transportation, Open-Air Testing, and Disposal, Presidential Determination Report to Congress, Notice to Congress and State Governors, it states that none of the funds authorized to be appropriated by this Act or any other Act may be used for the transportation of any lethal chemical or any biological warfare agent to or from any military installation in the United States, or the open-air testing of any such agent within the United States, or the disposal of any such agent within the United States, until the following procedures have been implemented. 1. The Secretary of Defense has determined that the transportation or testing proposed to be made is necessary in the interests of national security. 2. The Secretary has brought the particulars of the proposed transportation, testing, or disposal to the attention of the Secretary of Health and Human Services, who in turn may direct the Surgeon General of the Public Health Service and other qualified persons to review such particulars with respect to any hazards to public health and safety which such transportation, testing, or disposal may pose, and to recommend what precautionary measures are necessary to protect the public health and safety. And 3, the Secretary has implemented any precautionary measures recommended in accordance with paragraph 2 above, including, where practical, detoxification of any such agent, if such agent is to be transported to or from a military installation for disposal, provided, however, that in the event the Secretary finds the recommendations submitted by the Surgeon General would have the effect of preventing the proposed transportation, testing, or disposal, the President may determine that overriding considerations of national security require such transportation, testing, or disposal be conducted. Any transportation, testing, or disposal conducted pursuant to such presidential determination shall be carried out in the safest practicable manner, and the President shall report his determination and an explanation thereof to the President of the Senate, the Vice President, and the Speaker of the House of Representatives as far in advance as practicable. And 4, the Secretary has provided notification that the transportation, testing, or disposal will take place, except where a presidential determination has been made, a, to the President of the Senate and the Speaker of the House of Representatives at least 10 days before any such transportation will be commenced, and at least 30 days before any such testing or disposal will be commenced. And b, to the governor of any state through which such agents will be transported, such notification to be provided appropriately in advance of any such transportation. And then there's Title 18, Part 1. Under Chapter 113B, we come to terrorism. Under Section 2332H, titled Radiological Dispersal Devices, we find out that the government can in fact irradiate us anytime it wants to. Under Paragraph A, Section 1, it states that in general, except as provided in Paragraph 2, it shall be unlawful for any person to knowingly produce, construct, otherwise acquire, transfer, directly or indirectly, receive, possess, import, export, or use, or possess and threaten to use, a, any weapon that is designed or intended to release radiation or radioactivity at a level dangerous to human life, or b, any device or other object that is capable of or designed or intended to endanger human life through the release of radiation or radioactivity. Once again, that sounds fantastic. But in Part 2 it states, exception. This subsection does not apply with respect to a, conduct by or under the authority of the United States or any department or agency thereof, or conduct pursuant to the terms of a contract with the United States or any department or agency thereof. One example of this would be the Department of Transportation and the Department of Homeland Security now using full-body radiation scanners in airports, requiring you to pass through these DNA-destroying machines, which provably cause cancer, with the full protection of the U.S. government under Title 18. Again, the public has no recourse against this type of action taken by your supposedly representative government, especially under a national emergency. Now, to be perfectly clear, the United States federal government has given itself permission to commit terrorist acts upon not only the American people, but against the entirety of the population of this planet, human, animal, and other. It is also giving its permission to any person, entity, or private or public corporation to use what the U.S. Code defines as terrorism through their purposeful release of radiation or of radiological materials under government contract. To be clear, this is legalized terrorism. Do you understand? The U.S. government is legally a self-proclaimed terrorist by its own law of admission in Title 18 of the U.S. Code. This is your America. Now, Thomas Jefferson, the main author of the Constitution of the United States, obviously foresaw this absolute corruption of power, as is evidenced in many of his personal writings and journals. But one of those quotes in particular is surely the most apparent and appropriate foreshadowing of our current government. As Jefferson so eloquently stated, "Whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it, and to institute new government." And, perhaps equally as self-evident in its ideal, he stated, "The strongest reason for the people to retain the right to bear arms is, as a last resort, to protect themselves against tyranny in government." If what you have seen in this presentation does not, in your mind, qualify as tyranny against the people of the United States, or as wholeheartedly destructive to life, liberty, and to the pursuit of our happiness, or somehow does not qualify as a legitimate right of the people to abolish and institute a new government, then there is one other quote that applies to this situation and to yourself. Anyone who trades liberty for security deserves neither liberty or security.